The air left my lungs so fast my ribs hurt. 1 second I was standing at the edge of our dining room with a leather portfolio tucked against my hip, staring at the polished mahogany table my grandmother had imported from Charleston 30 years earlier, and the next, my mother was holding the corner of my Princeton application between 2 manicured fingers and feeding it into the blue-orange mouth of the fireplace. The paper curled black at the edges. Wax from the brass taper candles on the mantel had gone soft in the April heat, and the room smelled like smoke, old paper, and the lemon oil our housekeeper used on the floors every Friday. My father stood beneath the chandelier with one hand braced flat on the table, his gold cuff links flashing under the warm recessed lighting. My brother Mason lounged against the glass bar cabinet, rolling his car keys across his knuckles. Chloe Kim, his girlfriend, still had one hand on the brushed steel refrigerator handle from when she'd walked in with a pitcher of iced tea and realized she'd entered a war. Aunt Paula Decker sat frozen on a cream linen chair, wineglass halfway to her mouth, eyes bright with the kind of interest people get when they're relieved the disaster in the room isn't theirs. "You want to explain this?" my mother snapped, shaking the rest of the folder at me, "before I burn every last page. My name is Lila Hart. I'm 18. And this is the story of how my parents tried to erase my future for my brother, and how 6 months later I became the one person in the family they could no longer control. I didn't move. That was the first thing that unsettled them. My father had expected tears. My mother had expected pleading. Mason had expected me to lunge for the fire like an idiot and make this look theatrical, unstable, guilty. Instead, I stood in the amber light with both hands loose at my sides and watched my mother hold another sheet over the flames. The paper caught with a soft hiss. "Read the email again," my father said to Mason. Mason pushed himself off the cabinet and lifted my silver laptop with 2 fingers like it was contaminated. His mouth was turned up in that lazy, practice smirk he'd been using since sophomore year, the one that made adults think he was confident and made me think of polished knives. "It says," he said, scrolling dramatically, if Mason Hart's recruitment file were reviewed alongside his chemistry midterm and his outside tutoring records, certain people might have questions about how merit-based this all is. Aunt Paula sucked in a breath. Chloe stared at Mason, then at me. My mother let another sheet drop into the fire. "You were going to blackmail your own brother." "No," I said evenly. "I wasn't." My father laughed once. There was no humor in it. "Don't insult us. We found the folder. We found your drafts. We found the scholarship spreadsheets you made comparing what would happen if Mason lost Halbert's athletic aid." Mason spread one hand, as if saddened by the burden of my betrayal. "You could have just asked for help, Lila. You didn't have to go psycho over the fact that my applications were stronger." Chloe's eyes flicked to him at that. Just for a second. Just enough for me to register it. My mother stepped closer. She was wearing a pale cashmere set and diamond studs, and the expression she used at fundraisers when she wanted donors to believe she had never raised her voice in her life. Up close, I could see the pink flush high on her cheekbones and the tiny tremor in the hand clutching the pages. "Your brother has one chance," she said. "One. Halbert Academy has recruiters watching him. Stanford is watching him. Your grandmother has already done enough damage by filling your head with ridiculous ideas about equality. You do not get to sabotage this family because you're jealous." That word hung in the room. Jealous. Not exhausted from years of being told Mason's tournaments mattered more than my debate finals. Not angry because my college fund had been temporarily reallocated twice for his private coaches and travel teams. Not suspicious because my FAFSA login had mysteriously stopped working 3 weeks earlier. Jealous. Small. Petty. Easy to dismiss. Aunt Paula finally lowered her glass. "Honestly, Lila, this is low even for you. Even for you." That landed exactly the way my mother wanted it to. Like there was a long history of instability behind me. Like this scene was inevitable. Like I had walked into the room already guilty. My father picked up a yellow legal pad from the table. On it were my application deadlines, scholarship notes, essay prompts, the names of admissions officers I had spoken with. My handwriting. My work. "You made a whole strategy around tanking his offers," he said. "You tracked everything. I tracked my own deadlines. You tracked his too. Because you kept using my desk to print his materials." Mason rolled his eyes. "So now it's our fault you got obsessed." My mother fed another set of pages to the fire. The cream vellum darkened. folded inward and vanished. Her heels clicked across the slate tile like a metronome. Your father and I have made a decision. You are withdrawing every remaining application tonight. You're attending Dalton Community College for a year. You'll commute. You'll help at the office. We'll revisit things after Mason is settled. I looked at the fire, then at the blackening edge of what had been my Yale supplement, then at my brother, who wouldn't meet my eyes now that the hard part was over and the house was doing his work for him. Say something, my father demanded. I did. I just didn't say what he expected. Those were expensive envelopes, I said calmly. Silenced at my mother blinked. What? The linen ones, I said. From Cross and Mercer Stationers. Grandma bought them before Christmas. $42 a box. You should have at least checked what you were burning. Mason straightened. My father's jaw tightened. Aunt Paula frowned as if she'd missed a line in a play. Chloe set the pitcher down very carefully on the quartz counter. My mother took one step toward me. Don't be smart. I'm not being smart. I'm being accurate. My father slapped his palm against the table. You think this is funny? No. I reached for the glass pitcher, poured myself some iced tea, and took a slow sip while smoke climbed the stone chimney behind my mother. I think it's documented. That was the end of the version of the night they had planned. You could feel it. The room shifted. The heat from the fire still pressed against my face, but the energy changed. My mother no longer looked triumphant. She looked uncertain, which on her was subtle but unmistakable. Her chin lifted a fraction too high. Her shoulders locked. Mason stopped flipping his keys. What does that mean? He said. I set the glass down on a square leather coaster. It means the applications you just burned were decoys. My real applications were submitted 3 days ago. Mason laughed immediately. Too quickly. No, they weren't. Yes, I said. They were. My father stepped around the table. Lila! I pulled my phone from my pocket, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward him. Then I scrolled. I didn't rush. I let him read each confirmation email in order. Princeton, Georgetown, Northwestern, Columbia, Brown. Timestamps. Submission IDs. Follow-up messages from admissions portals. A PDF receipt from Common App. A scholarship portal confirmation. The pale light from the screen reflected in his eyes. My mother spoke first, but the force had gone out of her voice. That doesn't prove anything. Those could be forwarded, I asked. Mocked up? Fabricated? I consider that argument, so I downloaded the server logs too. Mason moved toward me. Give me that. I took one step back. No. He stopped because Chloe said his name in a low, warning tone I'd never heard from her before. He turned on her. Stay out of it. I kept my eyes on my father. You found the folder on my laptop because I wanted you to find it. He stared at me. I let that settle over the room. Then I kept going. The folder was created from Mason's account credentials at 11:42 p.m. last Tuesday on my computer while I was at debate practice. The draft email you read was saved at 11:47. And the reason I know that is because the study camera catches the desk and the door. Mason's face lost color so fast it looked almost artificial, as if someone had pulled it away with a cloth. Aunt Paula set her glass down too hard and spilled wine onto the table runner. My mother turned toward my brother with a sharp movement. What camera? She said. The one Dad had installed after the cleaning service changed. He forgot I had access to the family security app when he made me manage the vacation schedules. My father said nothing. That was my third confirmation. I opened another file. A still frame filled the screen. Mason, in his black hoodie, bent over my desk. My silver laptop open. My desk lamp on. His shoulders hunched. His hand on my keyboard. No, he said immediately. No, that's not. That's you, Chloe said softly. Mason swung toward her. I was trying to check what she had on me. On you, I repeated. Interesting phrase. My mother pressed her fingertips to her temple. Why would you do that? Because she was snooping, he snapped. Because Grandma was filling her head with things. Because she was acting like the money was hers. There it was. Not just college. Money. I looked at my father. Would you like to discuss the money now, or should I keep going? His voice came out low and dangerous. What money? I opened the scanned bank statements. The account number was partially redacted, but not enough to miss the point. My custodial education account. 3 transfers over 14 months. one to Halbert Athletics Development Fund, one to Beaumont Academic Strategies, the private college consulting firm my parents swore they were paying for with general household expenses, one to a travel agency in Naples for Mason's showcase tournament in Florida. My mother actually took a step back. "You told me the market was down," I said. "You told me my fund needed to breathe. You told me we'd talk after tax season. Instead, you drained $38,000 to build him a resume." Aunt Paula whispered, "Denise." My mother's face turned toward her so sharply it looked painful. "Don't." I enlarged the transfer date. March 14th. Same day my Northwestern fee waiver mysteriously disappeared from the portal. "Want me to show you the call log from when I spent 47 minutes on hold getting it restored because someone had changed the parent contact email?" Nobody spoke. I could hear the ice melting in my glass, the fire snapping behind my mother, a car passing outside on Hawthorne Lane. The silence spread across the dining room like spilled oil. Then my father drew himself up the way he did in board meetings, shoulders squared, voice clipped, every inch the man who thought certainty could overpower fact. "You're confused. That account was always under our management. Custodial management," I replied evenly. "Not personal use." Mason found his voice again. It cracked on the first word. "This is insane. You set this up." "No," I said. "You set it up. Poorly." He flinched. I scrolled one more time and brought up an email chain my grandmother had sent me from her old Crossheart packaging account 2 months earlier. Subject line records. In it, she had written 3 sentences that changed the shape of the whole room. "Lila, print and archive everything. Your father is moving numbers where numbers shouldn't move. If they corner you, don't argue. Let them finish." My mother sat down, so abruptly the linen chair legs squealed against the floor. "What is that?" she whispered. "It's Grandma," I said, being specific. My father reached for the phone. I slipped it back into my pocket. "You don't get to do that," he said. "Actually," I said, "I do." That was the line where the room stopped belonging to them. Mason looked from me to my parents and back again, trying to calculate whether outrage or denial would save him. My mother kept staring at the fireplace, as if the right explanation might still rise out of the smoke. Aunt Paula was now deeply interested in the wine stain on the runner. Chloe folded her arms and leaned against the counter, putting distance between herself and Mason without making a performance of it. My father was the only one still standing, but it wasn't authority anymore. It was inertia. "I want your phone," he said. "No. I am your father. That isn't a legal argument." His nostrils flared. "You think quoting legal terms makes you an adult." "No," I said. Being prepared made me one. He stepped toward me again. I held his gaze. "Come. Still." No raised voice. No shaking hands. I had spent too many years learning what panic looks like to people who need a target. Panic gives them a story. Calm takes the story away. "You will hand over every document you have," my mother said, voice thin now. "And you will stop talking to your grandmother about family finances." "I already sent copies." Her eyes snapped to mine. "To who?" I picked up my portfolio from the chair beside me. "Someone whose job title includes the word counsel." My father's face changed then. Not to fear exactly. To recognition. He understood systems. He understood exposure. He understood the difference between family drama and documented liability. It ran through him like an electric current. "Lila," he said, and now his tone was different. Controlled. Persuasive. "Let's not do this in front of everyone." I glanced around the room. "You started this in front of everyone." He inhaled slowly. "Fine. Go upstairs. We'll discuss it privately." "No. Don't be childish. Don't mistake composure for compliance." I looked at the fireplace one more time, at the collapsing edge of the last decoy packet, then back at my mother. "Keep the ashes," I said quietly. "They're the only applications you ever had control over." Then I walked out of the dining room, down the front hall with its marble tile and framed equestrian prints, and up the curved staircase under the yellow glow of the foyer chandelier while nobody stopped me. Halfway to the landing, I heard Mason start talking all at once. "She recorded us. She sent things. Mom, say something." I didn't turn around. In my bedroom, the evening light lay pale across the oak floorboards. My real acceptance folders were already backed up in 3 places. My scholarship essays were printed and sealed inside a fireproof document case in the closet. The account statements were in a drive taped beneath the drawer of my vanity. And tucked inside the false bottom of my suitcase was the letter my grandmother had couriered to me 2 weeks earlier, written on thick cream stationery in her slanted, deliberate hand. If Richard and Denise make a scene, let them. People reveal themselves fastest when they think paper can save them. That night, I slept with my door locked. The next few days unfolded exactly the way people do when they've mistaken intimidation for strategy. My parents tried volume first, then silence, then revision. At breakfast the morning after the fire, my mother set down a white porcelain plate with toast I hadn't asked for and said, in the brittle voice she used when rearranging facts, "Last night got emotional. We were all under pressure." "Not all of us," I said. She sat opposite me in the morning light pouring through the bay window, both hands around her coffee cup, pearl bracelet resting against the saucer. "I should not have burned those pages." "Correct. But you should also understand how shocking it was to discover you'd been collecting financial information and apparently involving your grandmother in private family matters." I spread apricot jam on my toast. "There's nothing private about custodial theft." Her jaw tightened. "You need to stop using that word." "No." She took a careful sip. "Your father is willing to restore the funds." "Willing or obligated?" "Lila, which is it?" She set the cup down. Hard enough this time to make the spoon jump. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I was tired. Because every family dinner had been an audition for my own worth. Because Mason had learned early that the easiest way to win in our house was to turn his mistakes into my responsibility. Because when I was 14 and won a statewide writing prize, my father left the ceremony early for Mason's practice. Because my mother once told me, while pinning my hem before a charity banquet, that I was so capable and therefore had to be understanding when capability became the excuse for neglect. Because people who believe you'll absorb everything eventually stop hiding what they take. I didn't say all that. I only said, because you thought you could. By noon my father tried a different approach. He asked me to stop by his office downtown, the one on the top floor of cross-hard packaging with the smoked glass walls and the polished steel logo in the reception area. Nora Salazar met me at the elevator. She had worked for my father since I was 10, first as executive assistant, then unofficially as the only adult in the building who knew where every file actually was. Her dark hair was pinned back in a severe twist, and she wore charcoal slacks and a navy blouse buttoned to the throat. She handed me a bottle of water before I said a word. "He is in a mood," she murmured. "When isn't he?" One corner of her mouth moved. "Fair." My father's office smelled like leather, printer toner, and expensive cologne. Afternoon, light hit the glass credenza and fractured across the room. He didn't ask me to sit at first. He stood behind his desk with his suit jacket off, and both sleeves rolled exactly twice. "We're fixing this," he said. "We. The family. That's usually your word for decisions you already made." His eyes narrowed. "Careful." I sat anyway, crossed one leg, and unscrewed the water bottle. Deliberate slowness does something interesting in a room full of people who want urgency. It makes them show where the fear is. He opened a folder. "I have transfer reversals in process. We can replenish the education account in full. We can also cover your freshman year directly. Off the books if necessary." I looked at the paperwork but didn't touch it. Why would anything need to be off the books? He exhaled through his nose. "Because the account structure is messy." "Messy," I repeated. He braced his palms on the desk. "You are 18. You do not understand how family finances work." "Then explain March 14th. His eyes moved once, involuntarily, toward the windows. "Small thing. Telling thing. We loaned against future distributions." "We?" "For Mason's development. From my custodial account. For the family." "You're using that word again." He straightened. "Your grandmother is unwell. She has always favored drama when she wants leverage. If she's been feeding you suspicions, that is unfortunate, but you are not going to let an old woman with a grudge fracture this family." I turned the cap of the bottle in my hands and watched the light reflect off the thin plastic. "Interesting." "What?" "That's the first time you've called her an old woman instead of mother." He went very still. A quiet knock sounded at the door. Nora stepped in with a stack of invoices. She placed them on the credenza, but not before her eyes met mine for half a second. There was something in that look, not warning exactly, more like confirmation. Then she left. My father lowered his voice. You need to stop talking to lawyers. So I talked to one. Lila. Counsel, I corrected. Not lawyers. Plural would suggest a team. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he said, What do you want? There are questions that are negotiations, and there are questions that are admissions. That one was an admission. I want a full accounting of every transfer from my custodial account. I said, I want written confirmation that no one in this family will contact any school, counselor, or admissions office on my behalf again. I want my original social security card, passport, and birth certificate by tonight. And I want you to understand that if anything else goes missing, I won't handle it quietly. His mouth flattened. You rehearsed this? No, I said. I survived it. When I left, Nora was at her desk under the cool, white light of the reception fixtures, tapping through an expense spreadsheet. She didn't look up until the elevator doors opened. You may want to check your personal email, she said. Then she returned to typing. By the time I got home, there were 9 messages in a new folder she had somehow routed around the family's shared account filters. Scanned invoices, internal emails, a chain between my mother and a consultant from Beaumont Academic Strategies discussing Mason's competitive positioning and reallocation from dormant education vehicle. Dormant. That was their word for my future when they thought I wasn't looking. There was also a shorter note from Nora. He said if this becomes public, accounting will carry the error. I will not be his error. I read that line 3 times. The first reversal, I realized, had never really been about the applications. Those were paper. The real thing under the paper was proof. And the people who rely on silence always forget that silence has witnesses. A week later, the first acceptances came in. Northwestern first, then Georgetown, then Brown. I opened the emails alone in my room with the late afternoon sun turning my curtains gold, not because I had no one to celebrate with, but because celebration in that house had always been a form of redistribution. If I smiled too brightly, it became insensitive to Mason's pressure. If I spoke too openly, it became self-promotion. If I wanted a dinner out, it became expensive. So I learned to hold joy quietly. That spring, though, quiet didn't mean small. Quiet meant protected. When the Georgetown packet arrived in a thick embossed envelope, my mother set it on the entry table without comment. The seal had already been slit. I held it up. Did you open my mail? Her hands were deep in the pockets of her cream trousers. I assumed it was family correspondence. It was addressed to me. We live in the same house. Temporarily. Her face changed at that. She looked tired now in a way I hadn't seen before. The smoothness was still there, the perfect blowout, the pressed clothing, the diamond ring, but strain had begun to show at the edges. She watched me take the letter out and read it in the foyer under the chandelier. I had been admitted, strongly encouraged to apply for a leadership grant, invited to an admitted students' weekend in April. You're not going to Georgetown, she said. I know. She frowned. You don't want to. I didn't say that. I said I'm not going. I already chose Northwestern. You chose. She almost laughed. With what money? I folded the letter back into the envelope. The kind that arrives when schools like your essays and the truth is time-stamped. It wasn't full coverage yet. I still had a gap. Books, housing, travel, the kind of expenses that pile up like splinters. But it was enough to change the tone in the house. Enough to make them understand the future was no longer something they could halt with a signature or a tantrum. Mason handled the shift badly. He started by swaggering harder, then by staying out later, then by getting mean in smaller, pettier ways. He moved my chargers, logged me out of streaming accounts, told people at school I was taking a victory lap at some nerd school in Chicago because I couldn't get in anywhere that mattered. Then the cracks widened. One afternoon, I found him in the garage beside my father's black Range Rover, punching a lacrosse ball against the cinder block wall hard enough to leave gray smudges. You happy? He said without looking at me. About what? About all this. He threw the ball again. It hit the wall and ricocheted across the epoxy floor. What exactly is all this? I asked. He spun. Sweat darkened the collar of his t-shirt. His face was flushed, eyes bright and restless. Mom crying in the pantry. Dad screaming at accounting. Chloe acting weird. Grandma not taking their calls. You turned one stupid misunderstanding into a federal case. I didn't move the money. He took 2 quick steps toward me. You always do this. Do what? Act innocent while everybody pays for it. That one almost made me smile. Not because it was funny, because it was honest in a way he didn't intend. In our house, consequences had always looked like persecution to the people who caused them. I think, I said quietly, you've confused paying for it with finally seeing the bill. He stared at me. His hands opened and closed at his sides. For a second I thought he might actually say something real. Something frightened. Something young. Instead, he said, "You think Grandma's going to save you?" "No," I replied. "I think she already tried." He laughed once, sharp and ugly. "Good luck with that." Then he walked out into the drive, got in his Jeep, and peeled away so hard the tires squealed. 3 weeks later, my grandmother died. The call came at 6:12 in the morning. The sky outside my window was a pale, unfinished blue. The room smelled faintly of cedar from the chest at the foot of my bed where I'd started packing for college. I knew before I picked up the phone. Some part of the body knows. It tightens around the truth before the mind catches up. It was Eleanor Shaw, senior partner at Bennett, Shaw and Mercer. My grandmother's counsel. Her voice was low and clear and professional in the way professionals become when they know grief has already entered the room. "Lila," she said, "I'm sorry to wake you. Your grandmother passed at St. Catherine's at 5:41 this morning." Peacefully. For a moment all I could hear was the blood in my ears. Eleanor let the silence stay intact. She didn't rush to fill it with comfort. I appreciated that. My grandmother hated verbal upholstery. "When you're ready," Eleanor said, "there are matters she asked me to discuss with you. Not today, but soon." Did she know, I asked, that the end was near? About the applications. A short pause. Your grandmother knew enough to prepare. After the funeral, the house became quieter but no kinder. My mother cried impeccably in black silk. My father delivered a eulogy about legacy and discipline that would have been moving if I hadn't spent the previous month reading the internal emails where he referred to her oversight as a generational bottleneck. Mason wore a charcoal suit and checked his phone between condolences. Aunt Paula supervised the flower cards as if sorrow were an event plan. I wore a black wool dress my grandmother had bought for me last winter from a tiny shop on Oak Street because, as she said while checking the hem, every woman needs one dress that makes her feel like she can enter a room and leave with the deed. At the reception, people came up to me in clusters. Former employees, old church friends, 2 retired board members from Crossheart Packaging. They spoke in those careful funeral voices, but beneath the condolences there was something else. Recognition, curiosity, a sense that Evelyn Crossheart had not been a woman who left loose ends. I found Chloe near the coffee urns in the church fellowship hall, fluorescent lights bright above us, folded metal chairs lined against the wall. She held a foam cup in both hands. Her mascara had smudged at one corner. "I'm sorry," she said. "Thank you." She hesitated. "For what it's worth, I told Mason he shouldn't have gone through your laptop." I looked at her. "I know." Her brows pulled together. "You know. You had the same nail polish on 2 nights in a row. That only happened when you were stressed." That startled a laugh out of her despite herself. Then her face settled again. "He's getting worse. I know that too." She lowered her voice. "There are things," he said. "Texts. Screenshots. If you ever need them." She didn't finish the sentence. But she didn't have to. "I'll let you know," I said. By August, I moved into my dorm in Evanston. It was small and bright and smelled like fresh paint and institutional detergent. The desk was laminated maple. The windowsill was chipped in one corner. The hallway lights were unforgiving. I loved it immediately. My roommate Talia Mendoza arrived with 2 enormous plastic bins, a basil plant, and the kind of laugh that made a room feel less temporary. We ate Thai food cross-legged on the floor the first night because neither of us had managed to assemble our desk chairs correctly. I looked out at the dark line of Lake Michigan through the residence hall windows and understood, for the first time in a physical way, what distance can do. It does not heal everything, but it clarifies scale. My parents texted sparingly. My mother sent one message about a comforter sale. My father asked for my class schedule for safety purposes. Mason said nothing at all until the second week of October, when he texted, You still making me the villain in Chicago?" I archived it without answering. Then 6 months after the night of the fire, while rain tapped against the dorm window and Talia was down the hall microwaving ramen, Eleanor Shaw called. I was sitting at my desk under the white cone of my task lamp with an economics textbook open and a mug of burnt dining hall coffee going cold by my elbow. The screen of my phone lit up with her name, and every nerve in my body seemed to sit upright. I answered on the second ring. "Miss Shaw." "Lila," she said. "Are you somewhere private?" "Yes." "Good. I need you in Chicago tomorrow morning if possible. Your grandmother's delayed instruction packet has matured." I frowned. Matured. That was her word. She left a sealed directive to be opened 6 months after her death, or immediately upon evidence of educational interference involving you. Given what was delivered to my office this week, we are proceeding now. I looked at the rain sliding down the glass. What was delivered? A server backup from Crossheart Packaging, a sworn affidavit, and a set of transaction reports that make your April concerns look modest. My hand tightened around the phone. From who? She didn't answer directly. Can you be at Bennett, Shaw and Mercer by 9? Yes. A pause. Then, with the slightest change in tone, she added, Lila, I suggest you get some sleep. Tomorrow is likely to be long. She hung up before I could ask anything else. I didn't sleep much. The next morning the city was all slate glass and December wind. Bennett, Shaw and Mercer occupied the 21st floor of a limestone building on Wacker Drive with brass elevator doors and a lobby that smelled faintly of polished stone. I arrived in a navy wool coat my grandmother had insisted I buy for weather and negotiations, and boots still damp from the sidewalk. Eleanor met me herself. She was in her 60s, silver hair cut cleanly at the jaw, charcoal suit, no wasted motion. Her office had walnut shelves, a Persian rug in dark reds, and windows that made the river look metallic. She didn't hug me. She shook my hand, then squeezed once. Coffee, she said. Please. She handed me a white porcelain cup and gestured to the conference room next door. The room was exactly what authority looks like when it has billing rates. Gleaming wood, high-backed leather chairs, thick carpet that swallowed footsteps, a long wall of windows washed in winter light. At one end of the table sat a man I didn't know with rimless glasses and a neat stack of binders. At the other sat Nora Salazar. For 1 second, I just looked at her. She had traded office navy for black. Her hair was down. There was a bruise-colored exhaustion beneath her eyes, but her spine was straight. She gave me a small nod. Eleanor closed the door behind us. This is Marcus Levin, she said, indicating the man with the binders. Forensic accountant. Miss Salazar has retained independent counsel and has agreed to cooperate fully. My pulse kicked once hard. Nora folded her hands on the table. He was going to blame me. I sat. I guessed. She exhaled. I should have come to you sooner. You came when it counted. Eleanor took the seat at the head of the table. Before the others arrive, you need the outline. Your grandmother amended her estate plan 11 days before her death. She transferred voting control of Crossheart Packaging into a trust with contingent instructions. If evidence surfaced that Richard Hart or Denise Hart interfered with your education, misused funds earmarked for your benefit, or engaged in self-dealing through family accounts, the trust was to remove Richard as operating authority and name you controlling beneficiary. I stared at her. Eleanor continued in the same calm tone. In plain language, your grandmother built a trigger. Marcus opened the top binder. Inside were tabs, color-coded and dated. The educational account issue is real, he said, but it's small compared to what followed. Once we imaged the company server, we found a pattern of transfers, backdated reimbursements, consultant invoices routed through vendor accounts, and attempts to conceal personal spending as recruitment development. Nora slid a USB drive across the table. This is the backup of the backup. I took it before Richard ordered IT to wipe the expense comments. Why help me? I asked. She held my gaze. Because your grandmother paid for my accounting degree when my daughter got sick and I couldn't keep 2 jobs. Because I watched your father treat that kindness like a royalty-free asset. And because last month he told me, word for word, that if the auditors ever asked questions, the discrepancies were going to be blamed on an over-ambitious assistant who couldn't handle the books. I felt something settle inside me then. Not surprise. Structure. Eleanor turned to me. There's one more thing. Your grandmother also left a letter for you personally. I thought it best you read it after the meeting, not before. Why? Because Evelyn understood timing. I almost smiled. At 9:07 the others arrived. You can tell when people have spent their lives being received. They enter rooms expecting gravity to bend. My parents still tried, but the bend was weaker now. My father walked in first with a dark overcoat draped over one arm and his expression arranged into its public version. My mother followed in a camel coat, gloves in one hand, face composed too carefully. Mason was behind them in a fitted charcoal suit that made him look older until you saw the panic flickering in his eyes. Aunt Paula came too, which told me immediately that my mother had mistaken proximity for power. Then they saw Nora, then Marcus's binders, then me. Mason stopped so abruptly my mother nearly ran into him. "What is this?" he said. Eleanor indicated the chairs opposite us. "Please sit." My father did not sit. I was informed this was a trust discussion. "It is," Eleanor said. "Then why is my employee here?" "Former employee," Nora said quietly. My father's head turned toward her. It was the first truly uncontrolled movement I'd ever seen from him. "Excuse me." "Sit down, Richard," Eleanor said. He looked at her, then at me, then at the folders. He sat. The next 90 minutes were among the most satisfying of my life, not because they were dramatic, but because they were exact. Marcus began with dates. January 9th, Beaumont Academic Strategies invoice for Mason's application narrative design, paid through Crosshard vendor account 4418. February 3rd, transfer from my custodial education account to Halberd Development Fund. March 14th, second transfer from the same account to cover travel and private recruiting footage. April 12th, staged family confrontation involving fabricated evidence placed on my laptop using Mason's credentials. April 13th through May 2nd, attempted backfill entries in the company ledger describing personal expenditures as youth marketing outreach. He laid down each document one by one on the table's glossy surface. Statements, emails, PDF metadata reports, access logs, expense summaries, screenshots. The materials of truth are almost boring when arranged correctly. That's why they work. My mother tried interruption first. "This is absurd. Those youth expenditures related to community sponsorship." Marcus slid a sponsorship roster toward her. "No cross-heart branding. No public event registration. No corresponding campaign materials." My father leaned forward. "You are drawing conclusions from incomplete records." Marcus did not even look up. "Then it's fortunate we have complete records." He lifted another tab. On April 11th at 11:42 p.m., Mr. Mason Hart used Ms. Lila Hart's device to create a folder titled Halberd Review. On April 12th at 6:58 p.m., members of this family staged a confrontation around materials they believed incriminated Ms. Hart. The event was captured in part by household audio and corroborated by witness statements. Mason's chair scraped the floor. "What witness statements?" Eleanor answered that one. Ms. Chloe Kim, Mrs. Paula Decker, and one from household staff confirming the burned documents were collected from a folder prepared that afternoon, not from outgoing mail. Aunt Paula's mouth fell open. "I did not give a statement." Eleanor turned a page. "You gave 3 text messages to your friend Linda Corbett describing, and I quote, Denise going full Joan Crawford and Lila not even blinking. Miss Corbett forwarded them when subpoena risk was explained." Aunt Paula went white. My mother hissed, "Paula." "What?" Paula snapped, all composure gone. "How was I supposed to know Linda would turn into the FBI?" "It's not the FBI," Eleanor said dryly. "Not yet." I folded my hands in my lap and watched them start to crack. My father tried a different lane. He turned to me. "Lila, whatever grievances you have, involving outside parties to embarrass your family is grotesque." I met his eyes. "Actually, you were committing fraud." The sentence landed hard. Clean. Final. Mason laughed in a burst of disbelief. "Oh my God, listen to her." Eleanor slid another sheet toward him. "Would you prefer unauthorized device access, fabricated evidence, and potential admissions tampering? We can be more granular." He looked at the page. His throat moved. "I didn't tamper with admissions." I spoke for the first time in several minutes. "No. You just planted evidence, so our parents would do it for you." He turned toward me, red now, hands spread. I thought you were trying to screw me over. I was trying to leave. Same thing. There it was again. Family as ownership. Marcus continued. July 22nd. Richard Hart authorized a draft press statement in the event of internal confusion around scholarship allocations. August 4th. Denise Hart emailed a parent liaison at Halbert to characterize me as emotionally volatile and suggested that if any admissions office called the house, they should be redirected to the appropriate sibling. October 28th. After my grandmother's funeral, Richard Hart instructed IT to archive and then purge comment fields attached to 4 questionable vendor payments. November 30th. Nora Salazar copied the server and resigned. My father turned on Nora. You stole corporate data. No, she said. I preserved evidence before you destroyed it. He leaned across the table. You were paid to follow instructions. I was paid to do accounting, she replied. Not to launder your son's resume. Mason slammed his palm down. Stop talking about me like I'm some criminal. I was applying to college. Marcus looked at him. With embezzled support, manipulated records, and possible false credentialing. My mother grabbed Mason's forearm. Don't say another word. Why? He shot back. Because Dad told you this was normal. Because you told me everybody does this. Because you said Lila would get over it the way she always does. That was the first fracture line through the center of the table. My mother let go of his arm as if it had burned her. Excuse me. You said it. Mason snapped. You both did. Every time. She's resilient. She's practical. She's not sensitive like you are, Mason. That's what you said. My father's voice went icy. Enough! Mason turned on him with sudden, desperate fury. No, you said it. You told me if I got the offers, the rest would sort itself out. Because it usually did, I said quietly. All 3 of them looked at me. I let the silence sit there. Physical. Heavy. Then Eleanor opened a cream envelope from the top of her folder. The paper was thick, the edges beveled. My grandmother's monogram pressed into the flap. This, she said, is the delayed instruction. She unfolded the letter and read, If you are hearing this in a room where Richard is still attempting to explain away arithmetic, then I was right to delay it. Richard, Denise, if you touched Lila's education, you touched what was mine to protect. If you used one child as the excuse to diminish another, you have forfeited the privilege of deciding what family means. Lila, if the room is full of stammering, let them. Numbers are more articulate than tears. My mother looked like she'd been physically struck. Eleanor continued, Pursuant to the 4th amended cross-trust, voting control of Cross-Hart packaging transfers immediately to Lila Hart. Richard Hart is removed from operating authority, pending investigation and restructuring. Denise Hart is barred from discretionary access to trust distributions. Any contest to these provisions triggers full release of the evidentiary packet to the district attorney, the board, and the press list attached in Appendix C. Aunt Paula made a tiny sound and covered her mouth. My father sat back slowly, very slowly. It was the first time in my life I had watched him look old. This is coercion, he said. No, Eleanor replied. This is estate planning by someone who knew her son. He turned to me again, and now the anger had changed shape. It wasn't dominance anymore. It was panic looking for leverage. You did this. I held his gaze. No, Grandma did. I just made sure you had the opportunity to prove her right. His eyes narrowed. You set the applications out. Yes. Mason stared. What? I made sure you find exactly what I wanted you to find. My mother whispered, Why? Because I wanted witnesses. That one broke something. Aunt Paula stood up. Denise, you told me this was a misunderstanding. You inserted yourself. My mother snapped. You asked me to come over. You said Lila had been unstable and that a family intervention might help. Mason whipped around. You told people I was the victim. Because you were supposed to be, my mother said, then seemed to realize too late what she had admitted. Nora exhaled once through her nose. Marcus kept turning pages. Eleanor placed another document on the table. There's also the matter of the board. My father froze. What matter? 2 independent board members were informed this morning. A special meeting is scheduled for noon. They have already reviewed preliminary evidence. Without my authorization. Correct. His mouth opened, then closed again. Eleanor folded her hands. Here are the options. 1. You cooperate. resign quietly, execute the repayment and governance agreements in front of you, and accept a managed public explanation centered on health, succession, and internal restructuring while criminal referrals are held in abeyance. 2. You contest. In that case, everything moves at once. Probate litigation, board removal, press exposure, potential criminal review. Given the documentation, I would not recommend option 2. Mason looked from face to face. What about me? Marcus answered. Your offers obtained with materially false support are vulnerable. How vulnerable depends on what your family chooses to disclose, and whether the schools ask questions first. My mother grabbed the edge of the table, so tightly her knuckles blanched. You cannot destroy his life over paperwork. I said it before anyone else could. You tried to destroy mine with paperwork. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I think she saw the problem clearly. Not that I was hurt, not that I was angry, that I was done. My father reached for one of the agreements, but didn't pick it up. If I sign this, what exactly does she get? Eleanor's mouth moved slightly. Control. The word settled over the leather chairs and glass walls and winter light. My father turned to me with the remains of the old command in his posture. You're a freshman in college. You can't run a company. I don't need to run it today, I replied. I just need to stop you from doing it tomorrow. He laughed once. Hello. And who put that in your head? Evelyn. Nora. This lawyer. You did, I said. Every time you assumed I wasn't paying attention. The meeting ground on for another hour. They demanded separate counsel. Eleanor was prepared. They argued over terminology. Marcus had source documents. My mother tried tears. Eleanor handed her tissues without softening a single deadline. Mason asked whether Chloe had really provided screenshots. I told him yes. He slumped back, so hard the leather chair sighed beneath him. Aunt Paula requested to leave twice and was told she could, after signing acknowledgement of her seat as a witness to the trust notice. She signed with a trembling hand. The timeline became a net. January, February, March, April, July, October, November. No gap wide enough to crawl through. My father's anger curdled into calculation. My mother's outrage thinned into self-preservation. Mason began blaming everyone in a different order every 5 minutes. At one point he turned on Nora. You worked for us. She looked at him with almost unbearable calm. No. I worked for a paycheck. Then I worked for the truth. Those are different employers. When the final documents came around, the room had gone strange with exhaustion. Outside the windows, the river moved dark between buildings. The winter light had shifted from white to silver. My father signed first because he understood sequence. My mother signed second because he had. Mason initialed where instructed, jaw tight, eyes wet, not because he felt remorse, but because he had finally encountered a process that didn't care what he felt. Aunt Paula signed last, muttering that she wanted her own attorney, which for once was a sensible instinct. I signed after all of them. The pen was heavier than I expected. Black lacquer, gold trim, my grandmother's. Eleanor had placed it beside my folder without comment. When I finished, I closed the agreement, slid it forward, and stood. My father looked up. That's it. For today, Eleanor said. He ignored her. His eyes stayed on me. You're really doing this? I buttoned my coat. No, I'm finishing it. My mother rose too quickly and had to steady herself against the table. Lila, please. I turned. That word had never sounded natural in her mouth when attached to me. You don't have to be cruel, she said. I considered her for a moment. The camel coat, the trembling gloves, the woman who burned paper because paper was easier to control than a person. Then I gave her the only thing that felt honest. You taught me the family business was about presentation, I said quietly. Grandma taught me it was about records. I looked at Mason next. Next time, make sure they're not working for both sides. He dropped his eyes. At the door, I paused and turned back toward the room one last time. They all looked smaller in it than they had when they entered. Even the light seemed less generous now, revealing too much grain in the wood, too much wear in the leather, too much strain across polished faces. My final words to them were simple. You always said paper remembers, I said. You were right. Then I walked out. 6 months later, my mornings looked nothing like they used to. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment above my grandmother's old print studio on Ashland Avenue, the space she had quietly purchased years earlier and tucked into a trust one didn't discover until the restructure was done. The floors were honey oak. The radiators hissed in winter and clanked like old men clearing their throats. Morning sunlight poured through the tall factory windows and lay across the kitchen counter like warm honey. I learned the rhythm of the neighborhood by sound. The bus breaks at 7:10, the coffee grinder downstairs at 7:15, the bell over the studio door when Nora arrived with ledgers under one arm and bad opinions about pastry under the other. I drank coffee from one of my grandmother's blue ceramic mugs and worked at a reclaimed maple table where I could see both the street and the first room of what had once been Crossheart Custom Prints. It wasn't Crossheart anymore. The board voted to separate the retail print studio from the packaging company, bring in independent management, and cooperate fully with the internal review. I kept the studio. It felt like keeping the right part of the name. I turned the back room into a free college application and financial aid workshop on weekends. We printed essays on thick white paper, taught students how to protect their documents, how to read aid letters, how to keep their passwords private, how to notice when adults use vague language around money. Northwestern let me build part of it as a community initiative. Eleanor connected me with 2 alumni in nonprofit law. Nora handled operations 3 mornings a week and pretended not to enjoy teaching 17-year-olds how to alphabetize their lives. People asked if the work was personal. I said yes. That was enough. As for karmic justice, it arrived with more paperwork than thunder, which somehow made it sweeter. My father lost his position before the quarter ended. The official statement cited succession planning and a health sabbatical. The unofficial version circulated through every supplier lunch and board holiday party from Chicago to Milwaukee. Richard Hart had treated the company like a private wallet and been removed by his own daughter after his mother's trust boxed him in. Men like my father don't just lose income when status goes. They lose the invisible corridors they spent decades building. Calls stop being returned. Invitations thin out. Their jokes no longer land. Last I heard, he was consulting for a logistics startup in Naperville out of a borrowed office with frosted glass panels and no assistant. My mother took the social consequences harder than he did. Denise Hart had lived for boards, committees, donor luncheons, hospital galas, the architecture of reputation. Once the story spread in its elegant, brutal half-whispers, the invitations shifted. Not vanished. Shifted. Moved later. Sent colder. The Women's Heritage Circle replaced her as chair to refresh leadership. The Museum Auxiliary thanked her for years of service and forgot to ask her back for spring programming. Women who had once leaned close to ask where she got her silk blouses now smiled from a distance and spoke to someone else. In a different life, I might have felt sorry for her. But I remember the smell of burning paper too clearly. Mason's consequences were the most visible and, to him, the most humiliating. Halberd rescinded its recommendation. 2 schools withdrew interest after questions surfaced about consultant-assisted materials and his altered chemistry grade appeal. He ended up at a regional college in Indiana without the athletic spotlight he'd been raised to think was natural light. He lasted 1 semester before a disciplinary issue involving a falsified attendance report put him on suspension. The last photo I saw of him online had been taken in the fluorescent brightness of a supplement store where he was working weekends, jaw clenched, polo shirt too tight across the shoulders, trying very hard to look like he had chosen all of it. Aunt Paula, who had spent years drifting through everyone else's houses collecting gossip and expensive leftovers, discovered that being adjacent to a scandal does not make you important. It makes you radioactive to women who host seated dinners. Her texts to my mother got shorter. Her phone calls got more frequent. Then, according to Nora, she pivoted toward church leadership with the energy of a woman laundering an image through casseroles. The enablers of the company faced smaller reckonings. One HR manager who had quietly redirected my mother's admissions calls for family privacy lost her role during the governance review. A consultant from Beaumont returned a portion of the fees and sent an email so carefully worded it practically wore gloves. The school liaison who entertained my mother's narrative about me being unstable spent 2 uncomfortable afternoons speaking to counsel and learned what documentation sounds like when it's read back slowly. My parents did try to contact me. At first the messages came angry. Your grandmother manipulated you. You have no idea what you've done to this family. Call me immediately. Then indignant. This is not how civilized people handle private matters. Your brother is suffering. Then nostalgic. Do you remember Christmas in Harbor Springs? The house feels empty without you. I miss my daughter. My mother sent a photo once of the hydrangeas blooming along the back fence with the caption, "Thought you'd want to see these." She used to prune them with my grandmother every June. For a second, just a second, my thumb hovered over the screen. Then I archived it with the rest. I didn't block them. Blocking is emotional. Archiving is administrative. On Thursdays, after my last seminar, I met Talia at a cafe in Rogers Park with scratched wood tables and green tile walls. She liked oat milk and gossip. I liked her because she never asked me to pretend the story was smaller than it was. One rainy afternoon, as steam fogged the windows and somebody in the corner tapped too hard on a laptop, she came back from the counter balancing 2 mugs and said, "You won't believe who I just saw." I looked up from a scholarship budget draft. That sentence usually means I won't enjoy the answer. Mason, at the Sheridan gym. He was trying to convince a manager he should be allowed to run youth performance classes because he has, quote, division-level experience. I stared at her. She sat down and lowered her voice. He also tried to flirt with the front desk girl while wearing a lanyard that said temporary. Despite myself, I laughed. Talia pointed at me. There she is. What? The human version of sunlight after litigation. That sounds expensive. It probably is. Another time Nora arrived at the studio with 2 boxes of cardstock and said, in the same tone someone might use to discuss weather, Denise was seen at the Field Museum fundraiser pretending she stepped down for family reasons. 3 women watched her explain it and then immediately turned their bodies away in unison. I looked up from the printer calibration. That's practically choreography. Nora set the boxes down. Poetic, really. Some mornings Chloe stopped by too. That surprised me at first, then it didn't. She and Mason had broken up 2 weeks after the meeting at Bennett, Shaw and Mercer. According to her, he had called her disloyal for not lying hard enough. She responded by mailing him the hoodie he'd left in her car and a printed copy of the screenshots she had already given Eleanor highlighted. It was such a clean gesture I couldn't help respecting it. She started coming by the studio on Saturdays under the pretense of needing help with transfer applications. She'd sit on the stool by the front window with a notebook open and ask practical questions in a voice that never reached for pity. What do I write if I want to explain a semester that went sideways without sounding like a disaster? The truth, I said. Structured. Eventually the questions got less procedural. Were you scared? Yes. It didn't look like it. I know. One evening, she stayed late helping me stack paper reams in the supply room while amber light from the storefront washed across the concrete floor. She slid a box onto the shelf and said, "For what it's worth, I was on their side at first." I know. She looked over. You say that a lot. People tell on themselves in tiny ways. She gave a short laugh. That sounds exhausting. It used to be. Then she leaned against the shelving unit, arms folded. When Mason showed me that fake folder on your laptop, he was too eager. Not angry. Energized. That's when I started paying attention. I set down the packing tape. Why help me? She thought about it. Because your family wanted me to confuse loyalty with silence. My mother did that for 20 years with my father. I promised myself I wouldn't. That answer stayed with me. By spring, the workshop had expanded. Students came in with manila folders, cracked phone screens, essays in Google Docs, dreams bigger than the zip codes they grew up in. We taught them how to make copies, how to scan signatures, how to read fine print, how to ask adults to explain terms in plain English. Sometimes parents came too, shoulders tight, embarrassed by forms. I was gentler with them than anyone had ever been with me. Not because I had to be, because I could be. That was the strangest part of everything that followed. Power didn't harden me the way my parents had always implied it would. It clarified me. I still studied, still wrote papers at midnight, still forgot to buy dish soap sometimes, still got nervous before grades posted. Justice doesn't transform you into a marble statue. It just removes the hand that kept pushing your head down. That summer, on the anniversary of the night my applications burned, I closed the studio early and went up to the roof with Chloe. The building's tar roof held the day's warmth. Plan,